had so much of a wealth of knowledge to also spread, and I realized that knowledge should never be privatized. It should be obviously like public use. And
Welcome back to the Sustainable Act. I'm really excited to introduce our guest today because I'm so inspired by this person. So, Isaias Hernandez has created a platform called Queer Brown Vegan and is an eco educator who lives a vegan and zero waste life. Isaias, hello.
hi, so nice to meet everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm just like, I've been following your page for a while now, and like,
Mm,
every time I learn something new, and it's just so valuable, and things that I didn't even think about, that you're
mm,
discussing. It's just like, I'm so glad that you created this platform. And I think what stood out to me, especially though, learning like from your page and like learning about you, was the importance of intersectional environmentalism. And I think that's when
mhm,
I realized over my journey in like sustainability and just learning about the climate crisis, all the people that I looked up to and the organizations I looked up to were prominently white and like it like
mhm.
lacked diversity. And I think this year I really started to look for more diverse environmentalists, and I found this whole community that I didn't know existed, and you were one of them, and I'm just so
Um,
glad.
I'm really glad that you were able to tune in and like obviously like embed yourself within different types of communities with the environmental community. I think it's obviously very daunting and sometimes scary to really tap into that or look more into research because you're like, where do I start? Like, there's no such thing as like BIPOC environmentalists. Like, you can't Google it and a group will come up. You see a lot of things. So I really appreciate you doing that work to tune into there and do research.
Yeah, I think as somebody who is also part of the BIPOC community and I like work in film, I already see such a lack of diversity in like my field. And whenever I do see someone that looks like me or someone part of the BIPOC community, on a platform such as like a filmmaker or an activist, I don't know, there's something in me that just like sparks a light of like inspiration that I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Like I can also do that. And like, it's just inspiring the fellow generations to come. And I never thought about it when it came to like environmentalism till now. And yeah, so I'm
Yeah.
really glad that like, we're fostering this community. And now there is, I think, because of the new projects that started with intersectional
Yeah.
environmentalists, that it'll be more of norm.
Yeah, that definitely Leah has done such an amazing job to talk about intersectional environmentalists, and I think that a lot of collectively we can all agree that a lot of the work that we've been doing has always been focused on interconnectedness and intersectionality, of course, right? And I think that the environmental movement essentially isn't siloed; it's ingrained and embedded and interconnected, and I think that's what you're trying to point out is that it's essentially a growing movement that has, for so long has been whitewashed, or what you would not whitewash, I'd say, but more about it's been represented in a different light. And I think that now people are being showcased all these identities and these work that people have always been doing, that we've always been doing, and our ancestors have been doing the work for environmentalism.
Mm-hmm. It's so, so important. But I just want to get to know you a little bit. So, like, what inspired this, like, journey and, like, the environmental journey? And, like, how did you get into this?
For me, for like my environmental journey, is that I always tell people, I am obviously Mexican American. My parents had immigrated from Mexico to the United States in the 1980s, and they settled in Los Angeles as my home. But I think that for me growing up, like I had all these like very unique identities for myself that I never really understood growing up. I mean, one is that unfortunately, I grew up in a community that lived near environmental injustices. So a lot of the air pollution in my nearby community was nearby waste incinerators. And later on, as I got older, I moved to a different city in Los Angeles that it's, of course, it's not near waste incinerators now, but it's near train tracks and heavy intersections of the freeway, which obviously pollutes more pollution, of course, long-term effects. And I think that a lot of the times my sustainable journey or my environmental journey was based off survivalhood. So I think that when I tell people I recycled cans at a young age growing up, it's like literally myself going to neighborhoods with my mom and collecting getting the cans from the recycling bins and putting them in your cart or in your bags, and just taking that to the nearby recycling fair, recycling exchange that was like nearby my house, that was like right down the block. And it was based off like that generation of survivalhood for me, and just understanding that it wasn't until I was accessing green spaces like the weekends, going with the parks with my family, to be able to play there, because obviously we lived in an apartment my whole life, so I didn't have access to backyards, and it was like couldn't go outside either for a long time because of the air quality, or like it was not quote unquote safe for a child to go outside during that time. So it was very this like complex journey in my life. It was only until high school when I started thinking about obviously like your career, right? A lot of people are like, what are you doing in college? Or what do you want to major in? And it's like, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just knew that maybe something in the science field was something appealable to me. I knew I wasn't that smart, but I knew I wasn't, I was just like an average student that like, just worked really hard. So I think that that was really my ethic. And when I got into UC Berkeley for environmental science, I could have never imagined that I got into that program, especially that major, especially because, my grades weren't the best in high school and I really struggled a lot. And I think that when I got in, that's when I started realizing of a lot of the interconnectedness of injustices. So the first protest I ever attended was 2014 for the Black Lives Matter in Oakland. And I think that was something that really, like, I understood of the racism that was happening, but I didn't really, as an 18-year-old, I didn't really physically like experience the pain, everything that you see that happened there. And it was really, something that really got to me. And I realized that like more and more, I realized like within academia that also wasn't being offered or talked about. So I realized I have to both be thinking through a community standpoint, but also an academic standpoint. And I think that more and more I delved into environmental science for my degree, and I realized that like a lot of the material was always siloed and inaccessible. And even within activist spaces for the environmental movement, when they talked about environmental racism, climate justice, I really did not know what those terms meant. I understood what, injustices were in a sense, but I didn't really know what exactly does it mean. Like, what is it? And I felt ashamed to ask those questions, even myself, that someone who came from that community, because I felt that I wasn't good enough to be speaking about it, of the language. So, and the people who dominated those conversations were usually white folks that obviously did not even experience environmental racism or environmental injustices. So I think for me, like, I realized that, it was a time for me to engage in this journey for my environmental career. And, as more and more I got older, I started unlearning more of my own biases, still, it's actively working toward becoming an anti-racist, and like, just continuously pushing myself to learn more and unlearn. And I think that, I'm still doing it today, of course, but I think that um, post grad, I was so confused what I wanted to do in college, because I love creativity, I love environmentalism, but I didn't know where the interconnections were. I didn't know what industry offered that. I didn't know. And it was very hard, as obviously the first, when you get out of college, you want to get a job, but you don't know what it is. You're thinking you'll be the dream job, and it isn't. And I think that, some people are, of course, I'm not going to just validate that. But I think for me, it realized that my first year post grad, I worked on an environmental magazine with my best friend. That's also the co-creator of Alluvia magazine, that highlighted Black, Indigenous, people of color environmentalists doing the intersections between art and environmental storytelling. And we really showcased these environmentalists that was only featured for BIPOCs, because we saw the lack of diversity in a lot of magazines, failure to focus on these individuals, and also to, if they featured them, it was only for a one pager or like half a page that they were featured in, and the whole magazine else was white folks being in the covers or hikers and stuff like that. So it made me really empowered to really learn that. And I think once we produced our first issue, had our launch party, it was so great. I was thinking about creating my own page too, that was just solely obviously owned by me, and just realizing I had so much of a wealth of knowledge to also spread. And I realized that, knowledge should never be privatized. It should be obviously like public use. And I think a lot of like environmental open education pages express that and have always been like that. So I think that, for me, I always believe like I didn't go to college for 4 years not to just privatize this information myself. Like, why don't I just distribute it in different ways that maybe people may not heard? But I think that Of course, as the educator perspective, I always present it through an academic perspective plus personal. But that's not to say that any indigenous or ancestral wisdom or terminology that you were introduced at a young age or values that you were instilled in growing up aren't environmental education, because they are. It's just that those words are sacred to your culture or your identity, and that's something that I always value too. That should never be exploited. That should never be, of course, marketed as this trendy word, because that's their sacred words, right? And I think that for me, like, being an educator, I realized that that's something that I really wanted. And I think that the way I designed Career Bound Vegan was to essentially create color code palettes to make sure that people were finding it engaging. But I think for me in college, I did it because I would always color code my notes because I wouldn't pay attention that well, or I wouldn't
Uh,
understand the information or synthesize it for myself. So I think for me, it was about implying those same
right.
webs of interconnectedness within my own work and creativity in my creative agency job that I learned, like design and stuff like that. So that's how really I built out this platform. But I started back in November 2019. So
Mhm.
I was going through a lot. Like, just had actually just gotten like let go from my job, and it was announced that January would be my last month. So it was a very pivotal moment of my life. I was just like um, so concerned. I was like so stressed, but also I felt very passionate and very healing to be able to write and read every day. That's something that I really wanted to improve on my reading and writing literacy skills. And I think that, through that really stemmed my page. And I'm thankful for all the people who have been supporting my page and really contacting me about it, because that's something that I really didn't really ever imagine. And I always just wanted to be this like resource for people just to use without having to even thank me, because it's not something that obviously like I want thankfulness for, it's just about being human.
I love that so much. That story, that like everything, like that's so inspiring because I totally, and I also like what I love about that is like how you grew up in this environment, and instead of just ignoring it or accepting it for what it is, you decided to go do something about it. Even if you were like,
Hmm.
you were so young, you weren't sure, because I think we've all been there at some point where we're just not sure
Hmm.
what we're doing in our life, or we're going to college, we're studying something, but we're not exactly sure what's going to happen after. And like, I think that's, like, very relatable, but you just knew in deep within you that, like, there's something that you wanna change, and then and the
Yeah.
power of education. I absolutely
Yeah.
love that because I think it's so important in this whole, like, climate movement, social justice is, like, not to guilt anyone into, like, doing something or believing something, but into just educating them and guiding them, and
Mm.
I think the power of that, because you can't change someone, but you can help them, and yeah, so I really love
Mhm. Give
that.
them the tools to unlearn. Yes.
Yeah, and what you were saying about, like, when you were learning about these terms like environmental racism and things that you weren't familiar with and you felt embarrassed, like, I think I can connect with that because that's kind of where I am. Like, I've only been in
Hmm.
this sustainability journey for like a few years, where I really started to
Hmm.
learn about it. But the whole like idea of the terminology behind what environmental racism is and like intersectionality is, it's like it's very new to me, and so hearing that, like, it's comforting knowing that, like, it's okay to be unfamiliar with it, and like and just learning, and spending, because that's the whole point of this, right, is to learn, educate, and become
Hmm.
better individuals going forward. And yeah, so
Yeah.
that's super inspiring.
Yeah, no, and like you were saying, like I think that like, a lot of us of course like have this stem of curiosity, and I think that it's just, it's hard to take risk. It's hard to
Mm,
some for us as humans, or myself anyways, like it's hard to be called in, right? But I think that at the end of the day, being called in is something for a step for you to like to step up essentially, and not something that should be like, oh my gosh, shame on you, like you don't know this. Because at the end of the day, like, even my younger self was like had so many mistakes or so many biases within my own head too, of course.
mhm. Yeah, and I think, and I really admire your. It's so cool to learn like where the color palette, that idea came from, and like how that was it like, yeah, but because I love your page in terms of like how simple it is and how clean it is, and like you said,
Hmm.
it's accessible information. It's not like intimidating, I think, right? Like it's like
Hmm.
something that
Yeah.
anyone can go to and then learn and not feel pressured or guilty or intimidated, I guess is the biggest word, because that's what I felt, is like when I saw your page I was like, wow, like it's like simple terms, but now I'm like learning more. And like what you said, it's like being called in to learn. Yeah, it's just all of that comes into.
Yeah. And like exactly what you said, and I think that it's more of a level one intro to environmentalism, right? I think a lot of people like the way I delve into topics are like like interconnecting certain topics, but I think that's like the surface of what is being told, right? I think myself like going deeper into my work, it's so much more complex, and like
Mm-hmm.
I still like have confusion. I still like question my own ethics and ethics of certain works, and it's just I think within the level one that I obviously like kind of introduce, I think it's welcoming for people to really engage in that topic because not only do they get to know about it, but there's a lot of questions being asked. So, sometimes people ask me questions that I posted that I'm like, I honestly don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I ask this question as an open response for you to critically think and challenge yourself to even, what do you think? Because, like, at the end of the day, like, my thoughts shouldn't be like upheld to a very high standard, of course.
Yeah.
It should always be held as like, this is my thought, and I think other people have so much greater thoughts too than even myself.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And yeah, just like, yeah, because it's sometimes hard to admit when you're like, I don't know the answer to that because you're on this, like, you have this platform. But I think ultimately
Mhm.
that's like what makes you even wiser down the road is like when you admit that you don't know the answer to something, but you're willing to learn and like, and then, pass that knowledge on. That's so powerful as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so I remember reading a post of yours where you said, I think you were describing like activism, and you said that you don't consider yourself as an activist, you're an
Mhm.
educator. What would you define an activist? And because for me, I see you as an activist, but maybe I'm just like, again, learning like the terminology behind.
Yeah, I think this is something like for myself, like I had considered myself, I think when I was younger, like 18 to like, I think 19 or 20, when I was obviously more involved in like school and like protests and stuff. But I think for me, like, there's so many different forms of activism, right? And I think that there's like, of course, like there's this scale of activism or in sense of like, severity or risk of being harmed, of course, within activist field. So I think like, there's that one where those who are in the front lines, right, that are risking themselves too, of course, that like maybe facing like death or maybe facing threats. And there's others that of course too within digital activism, like educating, sharing resources, and also being a forefront in those digital media spaces is also very scary too. So I think the reason why I myself don't really label myself as an activist is because to be quite frank, I've always been someone that's been more of on the supporter side of the activist field. I feel like, for those who may want to seek refuge, those who may want to maybe learn more about activism, just the theory behind it, or maybe like, essentially like the values or needing healing spaces or something like that. I'm more of that person that's on the ground and before those who are entering. So I think that, as an educator myself, like, yes, it is a challenging institutions that obviously upheld white supremacy, but it's also for me like the reason why I really identify myself as an educator is because I think that I've always been interested in education, and to the fact that how much myself as an educator has I've been able to change myself.
Mhm.
Not to say that activism hasn't changed me or what I did when I was younger, but it's just something that for myself anyways as I move forward is that how do I want to continually showing up for activists, not more like I am an activist, but I do not to say that I disvalidate anyone who, doesn't do frontline work or those who do digital activism as not a form of activism. I strongly validate their view and their values. I just think within even my own self as an educator and an amplifier supporter is just that I'm more of a different person within that realm.
I love that. I mean, coming back to like the power of education, and I think that's like
Mhm.
goes hand in hand and is equally as important, if not more. Is like even activists are constantly looking to education and learning and growing themselves. And so,
Mhm.
yes, thank you for clearing that up because, yeah, I guess like
Yeah.
sometimes there's like I feel like there can be a blurry line between those like terms where an activist is
Mm-hmm.
someone, because I guess even with our um like social media now and the day and age we live in now with like digital media, there's
Mm-hmm.
so much more resources out there that it could sometimes be a blurry line of like what is exactly an
Yep.
activist versus an educator. And yeah, but I think
Mm-hmm.
both are important and play a vital role in your life. And I want to like jump forward a little bit into uh like wellness and health and how you integrate that into like your life and like even the platform that you've created and the community. And because I think for me personally, like that goes hand in hand with sustainability and environmentalism, is taking care of yourself as well as the planet. And so like what are you doing in terms of like health and wellness and in your life?
I think for me, I've always been someone that's been able to really control sometimes my stress levels. I think that, for so long growing up, I had this survival mentality. Even throughout college, it was very dangerous and very toxic. That, like, of course, it left a lot of detrimental health effects long term for my mental health. But I think that, for me, what really kept me grounded in doing environmental work and being able to really give myself space is just understanding my own boundaries, and also realizing too that, you know, there's so many amazing organizations, so many amazing individuals who are constantly doing this work, even so many like really great pages that have been doing so much work in the realm of sustainability that they should, be more at the forefront, of course, of these conversations. So I think that just realizing, one is that aspect, but two, it's like the way I engage my work is I don't necessarily see it as a job. I don't necessarily usually see it as like, this is, I need to be famous. I need this. It's more about like, this is what I really believed in. This basically just like really interacting the way of how I engage with my content. So for me, like the way I see that I was able to really contribute to my mental and physical health is like the way I obviously created this page was with intentionality, right? It wasn't like one day I was like, woke up and I was like, oh, I need to create this page, right? Like I like you said too, I only was only involved in certain communities within my own magazine community that I really knew. So I didn't really know much of like a lot of things either, or like other communities that have existed. And it was over time that I had this intention of like being sure that if I create this page that there would obviously be responsibilities within myself, but also the way that I would want to interact with others. So I think that the way I kind of saw it was like, for me, writing can sometimes be liberating, right? And reading can be liberating. And I realized that, like, for me, I was never the best writer in college. I was never the best reader in college. And I saw this as a way to really improve myself and my writing skills and just really improve that and my research skills. Because I feel like a lot of times there's this notion where people assume because you come from a low income background, you attended a quote unquote prestigious university, that you're usually smart and you're hardworking, but or you had scholarships. And it's something that for me, it's like I wasn't really that smart. I really struggled a lot in academia, and it was just something that like people always assume that like you're just so intelligent. But I think for me, it's like just realizing where I'm able to heal through my page is what prioritizes me, and to the community I really cultivated were people who obviously valued their work, recognize their work, and constantly honor, amplify, and share their work, and constantly will always be like the forefront to advocate for their pages because they are the people that have been doing this work obviously like for X amount of years. Not to say like, I wasn't doing it and I was doing it in different forms or ways I was thinking my thoughts, but these people, Black, Indigenous people of color, environmental orgs, and influencers and creators, activists, environmentalists, have been doing this for years. And that's why, for me, cultivating a community on Instagram was really a way for me to connect with others, but also really meet so many amazing people I would have never ever met online, honestly, or in real life. I mean, like, I
Mhm.
would have never thought I would meet so many cool, amazing individuals like yourself either. Like, like it's just like so many people that like I love and like have developed so much unique relationships with is what really kept me going and what constantly keeps me going on the stage.
I agree. I completely agree because that's like when I first started, like, and I told you about like how when I started looking for that community, and then or like I wasn't even looking for a community. I was just looking for like some different people to look up to. and then suddenly I found this community, and that just like, yeah, like connecting with yourself, connecting with all these other really cool people that I probably wouldn't have ever talked to or connected with. And it's so cool. Like, and then you're constantly learning and growing from there as well. Cause I agree, like even myself, like I've always loved school, but I've never been like the most like academically passionate person, like the, like straight A's or kind of thing, but I love learning. And like, so I think
Mm-hmm.
finding different forms of educating yourself is also very important, right? Whether that's like reading books, watching movies, listening to podcasts, talking with other people, whichever way helps you learn, I think is like the more
Mm-hmm.
important thing. And yeah, I think like, the education system, like, I mean, there's a lot to talk about there too, because of like the way the system that we were kind of brought up in, with like, our grades kind of like prove everything, even though we may have other like these other aspects. And I think that's like I think benefits of like once you leave school and then you leave that system and then you like open yourself up to all these like world of opportunities, and realize like, what your report card says isn't like, that doesn't define who you are and like how much you
Yeah.
know, and you're actively learning
Yeah.
for the rest of your life, not just until you
Yeah.
graduate.
No,
Yeah.
I honestly agree with that. I feel like grading systems oppress people essentially. Unfortunately, we live in a world where obviously a lot of people value grades. They value the system that identifies them by a system. And I think for me, I never liked that. I always hated that. I always hated people always ask me, what did you get on this test? Or did you get a good grade? Or did you pass the class? And it's like, yes or no. But it's like, for me, like you said, like, grading systems were constructed in the sense to form of like, of course, categorize and oppress people. And
Hmm.
also the system itself, obviously, there's also other factors, of course, on it. And, like what is free education? What is that? And I think such a great page that does that. It's called Slow Factory that was created by Celine Simon that their organization has done open knowledge, circular system, open education systems that have been doing so much great work. And like, I'm glad they're getting so much recognition. They should always be in the forefront of these conversations because, environmental education, of course, like why is it that we allow a system of this, who knows what system is really creating this behind it, of these educational programs that are quote unquote common core or like quote unquote ready to prepare you as an individual, when these systems don't necessarily help you. They're all siloed, they're all, singular variable. None of them are multivariable within themselves. So it's like, why do we expect that, education systems that are created by institutions are as trustworthy as composed to others that are, of course, like, organizations that have been doing open education, like such amazing orgs. Like, why don't we value them to a higher standard other than these institutions?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's such an important like, point, because that kind of goes along with everything, like even the environmental sector. It's like, just like the institutions that we're raised up in, and society in general. And so it's like, how do we dismantle that and like, pave a new way for like these new ideologies, new people like in those leadership positions. And yeah, so I want to ask, like, what are some of the challenges that you have faced or continue to face, like with, like, ever since you started this journey, or like just being in this like part of this movement, and as somebody that's like part of the like BIPOC community and queer, so what are some of those challenges?
I think the fact that like a lot of it can sometimes be separated or singular. So I think that it's really hard, of course, to make those interconnections sometimes.
Mhm.
But I think that, having this queer identity, being obviously, cis male, also, being, brown person, obviously not like, there's different colors of like, black and brown, like, so it's like acknowledging also my own privileges too. And I think that, some of the challenges myself I face honestly is this, that the fact that, sometimes people obviously will never always agree with my work, which is completely fine, of course. But to the fact that like I've always made it clear since day one of my page is that obviously these terms have always been created or obviously been coined by, right? So like none of that content that I obviously ever like create is from exactly like obviously like my me creating that term. My thoughts and the way I define it, yes, that's a lot of my thoughts and a lot of ideas that I have incorporated in. And of course, the way I write, of course, is my solely thoughts. So I think that sometimes people can always be like, "Oh, you didn't create this," and it's like, "Oh, well, of course I didn't." Like, of course, I've claimed that I don't created these terms, and I think that's something that obviously I've always been citing my resources to be like, this author said this author said this author said this. It's up to the individual to do their own research too, of course.
Hmm.
But to the fact that a lot of the times I think people sometimes think that like oh, like why do you need to present academia through obviously like a white lens when and essentially like I have always acknowledged that a lot of traditional ancestral knowledge is education, right, and should always be at the forefront of these conversations and should be always valued at the highest, right, other than academia being the second in that sense. And I think that a lot of the people sometimes think that way, but I think that I've clarified myself multiple times too that, like I mentioned earlier, is that a lot of those terminologies are very sacred. And sometimes, like, I myself, I'm not in the position to be talking about those terms, right? And I think that too, another thing that, like kind of like indigenous sovereignty, indigenous rights, like, as someone who's obviously non indigenous, like, I don't have the rights to be talking about that essentially. I have the rights to support and read about it, authors that are indigenous that have written about it, but I don't have the right to really, express myself in that way because I'm not indigenous. And, a lot of the times, I don't want to look into terminologies from different Black BIPOC individuals because of that sacred knowledge that is obviously like only available to their people. So why go into this academia extractive mindset to try to extract these terminologies and then claim it as yourself?
Hmm.
So I think that as I always told people, like, of course, that there's certain terms or certain phrases that obviously are related to the terms that are already constructed or that were created by academia. It's just that the way that they're phrased or talked about is different within cultures, which is also valid, of course. So I think that something that I've always been clarifying for and like have discussed with people, and luckily, like they understand that too. And I think that it's obviously a misunderstanding sometimes, but also something that I've always been clarified. And I think it's usually the people who are nearer to my page, whereas the ones who have followed me since the beginning, I think they've realized that and like recognize my mission of interconnectedness always, not something to be like, oh well, yeah, like this is there, but it doesn't really exist in my page.
Yeah. No, and that's a really good point for like even people wanting to learn more about like environmentalism or like people that want to start opening up about this on their platforms is like just keeping in mind like being mindful of like where you're getting information from and who you're sourcing and like it's so important to be highlighting like the BIPOC community that's been on the forefront for so long but not
Mhm.
speaking for them, kind of showing their support for them. So like that's a really
Mhm.
good point that you brought up, that even as our responsibility is like just really being mindful of like how we're sharing this information and who we're sharing it for and why we're sharing it. And
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that's something that, of course, like, always ask your resources, but also, of course, never glorify people either. Like, it's one thing to obviously appreciate and support their work, but I always tell people, like never put me on a pedestal. Like, always see me as you, right? See me as the way I would want to treat you, and I treat you the same way I want to be treated. So it's something that I always tell people, like, of course, like their thoughts and like valid, and I get always questions too from people are like, can I create environmental education? I just don't want to copy your page aesthetic. And I'm like, it's not copying because I don't own rights to those environmental terms. No one
mhm,
ever said you're not able to define those terms. What is said, of course, is that you can't literally copy and paste my own thoughts and like
mhm,
content that I've created, right? Like that's copying, of course, because then that means like, what are you thinking? But you can obviously be inspired by the words and like rephrase it or like construct your own words, incorporating those frameworks and ideas. Like myself too, of course, I've obviously listened to a lot of conversations and gotten inspiration from ideas too, of course. But I think like obviously citing those resources are also valid, but understanding too, like I don't ever want to be the gatekeeper of environmental education and be like, oh well, I created this and I think of it this way. It's more like you are interested about environmentalism, this is going to help your career, this is going to help you as an individual, then do it, right? No one should ever make you feel ashamed or make you feel like you're copying someone or you're being aligned to. But recognizing too where copying obviously is incorporated, where you can't just copy and paste someone's words over and claim it as
Yeah.
yours.
And I love that like you're paving this path. Like the fact that you're able to like inspire other people to also go and like start educating their communities and like, build their communities
Mm-hmm.
and continue this conversation, because you're right. Like it's not like we own like those terms or like just this whole movement. It's like we're all in this together, because sustainability means the world and like all the people that come
Mm-hmm.
together. And I think because that makes me so happy to hear that more people want to start talking about it and sharing this information. I think a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
what holds people back, because from my personal experience, I won't even say it for everybody, is like when you don't know or you're scared of like putting stuff out there or like talking
Yeah,
about
or the
issues.
critique. Yeah.
Exactly, the critique. Like even being in film, like I'm
Mm-hmm.
so like I want to bring light to diversity in film and things, but I wouldn't talk
Mm-hmm.
about it openly or vocally because I was just afraid. And like what you said in the beginning too, of just like sometimes feeling like you're not equipped with that knowledge to talk about it, or you're just not like but I think so inspiring like another community to go start talking and starting these conversations within their families, whether it's about the environment, whether it's about racism, humanity, all of it's so important, like just normalizing this. And
Yeah, no, it's something should always be talked about and deconstructed. And I think that, of course, to understanding that your own privileges, like I'm not ever asking or demanding people to start talking about it in their jobs. Like, what if they're a single parent or slash like that's their only job? Like they're not supported by their family, or they are the support system of the family. So it's also recognizing that too, that not everyone can obviously do the same capabilities that I can. And of course, to myself, being able, I'm me and my brother and sister support my parents too, of course. So it's like something obviously like, it's something regenerative and also something that allowing that guilt and shame to go away, because at the end of the day, like you didn't create that organization, you didn't create that company, you didn't create that industry. So blaming yourself for not speaking up against it, like, it's you shouldn't feel shame, but of course, like injustices that are happening, if you're seeing and you want to be vocal about it, I always say you should, or find ways to also support that individual that may have been oppressed or silenced in that industry, of
Mhm.
course. So it's something, of course, that it's like a scenario case by case, of course.
Hmm. That's such a good point. Well, so I want to end this off with I always do a rapid fire questionnaire
Hmm.
at the end if you're down for that. So, like,
Yeah.
5 questions. First thing that comes to mind in 1 to 5 words, and no pressure. And if you go into a story,
Okay.
then like I love stories, so no pressure. All right, you ready? Okay, so the first one's best advice you've ever gotten.
Be ready to fail, but be ready to learn.
I love that. That's so important. That's something like I remind myself daily, because like you have to fail in order to learn.
Yeah, it was so hard, I think, realizing that in college, when like failing exams, failing like midterms, failing assignments, you're just like oh god, but then you're just like, okay, like I'll be okay. It's not
Yeah.
destroying me, but you'll be okay. Yeah.
Yeah. What did I learn from this? What can I do better next time and like going forward? And
Mhm.
awesome. And so second one's worst advice you've ever gotten.
When one But the worst advice I've ever gotten, I think I have to say, was that don't let one ever misconstrue your passions. Be- and I say that because I remember telling someone about my passions, and they just like belittled me, like kind of looked down on me, and they're like, "That's like no, like you need to think logically." Um, and I think that like logic is important, of course, but using your emotions and your own thought, like at the end of the day, you're a temple essentially. You come home to yourself, not to them.
Yeah.
So like at the end of the day, you know your thoughts and your feelings more than yourself than they do, right? So I think that was a mistake I ever did, was actually reach out to someone younger than me. Didn't really relate to me, and of course, like perpetuated white supremacy. So I was like, why would I ever do? Like, I was the biggest mistake as a young person at age 19 to ask for career advice. But I think that because of that person, like I realized like, wow, like what are you doing? And then what am I doing now? Like I'm way much more happy in my life than you are, obviously.
That hits home so hard for me for being like someone like going into film and arts and hearing like opinions or like asking the wrong people for advice in terms of like what's logical or what's safe or
Mm-hmm.
what's like, yeah. So you're right. Follow your passion because like you can turn your passion into something that's like not only like better for yourself but better for the world, right? Like take the skills that you
Mm-hmm.
have and the qualities you hold and do something better for like put something better out in the world, I think. Not to say
Exactly.
like pressuring everyone to do that, obviously. But yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
use the your tool in your way and like yeah, so that's so great. I love that. Third one is if you could fix one thing in the world, what would that be?
I mean, I think fixing the educational system,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, it's all interconnected too. Of course, we need to understand that. But me and you obviously understand that. But fixing the educational system that has obviously failed Black, Indigenous people of color students across the world, mainly, of course, low income areas, right? Under resourced communities and under resourced educational systems that have failed to really implement equitable and just systems for students, and also ensuring that the own professionals and teachers are obviously advocating for equitable equal pay, of course, and high pay that pays them equitably fine, but also hiring people who actually love to teach students, not just like I'm very smart, I have a high degree, when I talk to people, no one really understands my work, but I understand it, and I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
teach because I'm smart and I get it. Like I hate teachers like that. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that fixing the system like that is something I would want to see change. But of course, that means obviously like getting to the root cause, that the
Mm-hmm.
system of education from white supremacy.
Yeah, no, that's such a big thing. Like just education, like first of all, like have accessible education to like everybody around the globe is like I think a start too. And then, reevaluating the education system that we currently are in and like what we've been learning. And like, yeah, that's something a conversation I had with my younger sister. She's 13 and she said not once did they learn about like Black Lives Matter or like just the history of Black or Indigenous. Neither did I grow up learning that. It's something I learned in
Mm,
my like adult life. And so I think yeah, definitely like reevaluating that and the teachers. Yeah,
mhm.
that's a huge thing, and I only hope that like we keep pushing forward towards that change and we start seeing that soon. And
Yeah, me too. I mean, like I just saw too much in academia, even in college. And I was like,
mhm.
why do you get paid so much for like failing your students or looking down on them? Like that's not an educator.
Yeah,
That's just someone who cares about the money and their
yeah,
bougie or whatever lifestyle, and they don't care about students' well-being. They only care
mhm,
about the money. Like
yeah.
it was just so disappointing seeing that, and I realized like, man, if I can get rid of all these educators, mainly
Mhm,
like the white professors that obviously uphold these institutions, like
yeah.
um, it's a big issue for me.
No, for sure. Same for me. Like I had that too, that same experience. And funny story. So I finished my third year, and then I didn't go back for my fourth. It's been a year.
Mhm.
I'll like eventually go back, but it was just yeah. I just got to
Yeah,
a point where I was like, I'm paying a lot of money to be here, and I'm not getting what I'm like paying for, and it's just like the I think the people that were in those positions and just realizing like that was not what it does not align with my values at all. And just yeah, it's a huge issue. And I
yeah,
think like there's some people that decide like they're just going to stick through and like do it, and it's like okay, peace, like now go do your own thing. But I just couldn't. Like I was just like this is not
yeah.
for me, and I'd
And
rather go out and learn myself or like figure out a different solution. But yeah,
yeah, and take your time or whatever you need at the end of the day.
exactly.
Like you shouldn't be done in 4 years. I honestly threw away a lot of my mental health and deteriorated it
Mhm.
because of this fact of society saying you have to graduate in 4 years.
Mhm.
That's the reason why I like obviously messed up a lot of my mental health, of course,
Mhm.
and also the lack of support financially that academia provides, especially for low income students. Because like I said, like people always assume like, oh, you're on a scholarship, you'll be fine. But it's like, I'm not on a scholarship, and I'm struggling, and I'm not
Yeah.
just because I'm low income and like, come from this like neighborhood that experiences environmental justice, that doesn't always mean that like, I'm like intelligent. Like it doesn't mean that I'm like always, it was something that I had to realize myself too. And also distinguish from obviously low income students that were like me and came from under resourced high schools that obviously a lot of them were of course intelligent too. That's not to say they're not, but for me it's like it's not always the case like that.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. That like very resonates with me. Oh my gosh, I love talking to you because I feel like we have a lot in common, just like things that like
Yeah.
connect us with experience wise and like maybe a conversation for another time. Um so the fourth one is, what do you do for self-care? Coming back to mental health and well-being.
Oh my God, this is such a good thing. But I think for me, honestly, with my boyfriend and I, we like FaceTime a lot. So it's really great to have someone in your love life, like to be there to support you through like a lot of things that you've been going through, but also be able to watch like Netflix party together. So I think for me, it's like I watch a lot of Netflix and also watch a lot of anime
Mm-hmm.
by myself, of course. And it's like me time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like that's something that's like the best self care practice
Yeah.
for that I do, honestly.
That's so awesome. Being with your loved ones, like people that like bring you up and like uplift you, and then
Hmm.
me time is so important. Like I, even for myself, I'm a very outgoing person and I like feed off the energy of other people, but I need me time, right? Like you need that time to like sit with your thoughts and reflect on who you are, and just treat yourself without feeling guilty.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
Exactly.
So last one is, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
This is really, I love this question. I honestly, the full work time schedule for me is not really necessarily for me. I see it in the future. I see myself in the future, hopefully becoming either an educator professor, unfortunately in an institution maybe, or slash an NGO,
Mhm.
or also being a motivational speaker where I can really educate and work closely in constructing climate education programs or climate education systems within schools. And I think that's something that I really want to do in the future. And I think that with Queer Brown Vegan, it's really opening a lot of doors of opportunities for me, but also like a lot of thankfulness for my community for just supporting me as an individual because I would never have thought like, I would be able to really make this my career in the future or even think of an idea of making this as a career in my future because society or in college always ingrains of like you just get a job, you work at an industry, you sell yourself for X amount of years, and you get no recognition, you get no status in the sense of like appreciation for the work you did. It's more about like, oh, grats, like you did it for us, but under the company's name, we own or label
Yeah,
everything as us and
corporate
owned by
world.
us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so great. And you know what? We do need more educators like yourself. And I think, like you
Oh.
said, like being in that institution, we need more professors. We need more teachers that are like yourself, that change and challenge the system. And even if it's like you have to work within that institution, you're there and you're able to you have that. But it's just like, when you get into politics, it's like once you're in there, you
Hmm.
have the power to create change. And it may take
Yeah.
some time. It's not going to be like an overnight change, but like you're starting it, and it's like so
Exactly.
great. And so, also each week we, like as a show, we recommend something to our listeners. And this week I want to recommend the Instagram account Intersectional Environmentalist. And I think that there's a website and everything, and it's so great because like not only for like everyone to check out and see the resources that and the blog posts and the people they're featuring, but you're just learning
Mhm.
something new, and you're open to this whole new like community, which is something I recently found. So, and you're part of
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I was connected with them, and Leah has an amazing team. I'm so glad to be part of the committee or team itself, and it's just something that I helped work on the LGBTQ2S plus section.
Mm-hmm.
So just like creating a quick paragraph about or summary about it, and just finding the resources that I felt that one should also engage in, not through obviously a Western lens, but also like queering the environmental field. So definitely check out that page. I'm so thankful for everything, the work that Leah has been doing, and I think that um, intersectional environmentalism is going to be doing such a big things. Of course, I can't speak on it because Obviously, I'm like not like one of the forefronts. I'm just a member of the community, but definitely they have so much amazing updates, and really recommend those who are getting into environmentalism to check them out.
Yes, I love that, especially like those that are getting into environmentalism. So you're not like a few years down and you're like, "Oh, wow, like this is something I never thought about." It's like this should be like again at the forefront, the first thing that you think of,
Hmm.
right? But yeah, thank you so much for being such a light in this
Yeah.
world and for chatting with me and like taking time out of
Oh.
your day. And how can people find you if they want to connect with you after this?
Yeah, definitely. You can follow me at Queer Brown Vegan either on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, soon to be on Tumblr and TikTok. Actually, I'm on all those platforms. I just need to post more on those.
Uh-huh.
And also, you can check out my website, www.queerbrownvegan.com, and you can find my LinkedIn on there too if you'd love to connect with me through also a professional setting. So definitely support my work, and also make sure to check out the people I follow.
Mhm.
Those are people that I always obviously will always recommend to follow, and also follow your podcasting page. So
Oh, thank you
definitely
so
check them
much.
out.
Thank you so much. Do you have any final thoughts?
Thank you so much again for having me, and I really appreciate everything that you've done and like continue doing. And I can't wait to see how your work blossoms over the next few
Thank
months and
you.
years.
Likewise,
Yeah.
guys. Thank you so much. I hope you take
Yeah.
care.